got put on what's called a blackout. The military does not like for families to kind of learn about the deaths of loved ones from like Timmy posting about it on Facebook. And our first sergeant literally called us to formation and basically told us, people die, we're at war. It was time to just suck it up and keep going.
I've got like a history of addiction, very, very amazing times with the police as a kid. You know, they knew me on a first name basis, unfortunately.
And I just broke down. I broke down into tears. I was a total mess. And she asked me what was wrong. And I said, I just don't understand how I'm supposed to forgive a group of people who murdered my friends, my family, and like not dishonor the memory of those people. Blood Lab was our aim to create a collaborative workspace. It was focused on the idea of community, to get as many intelligent Bitcoin builders together as we possibly could. The ego it's a pretty crazy thing, and it can really mess things up pretty good.
Kyle Murphy's story hits like a gut punch and inspires like a battle cry. Combat medic Kyle returned home shattered. His own words, I was broken as fuck. But the darkness didn't define Kyle. Fueled by the teachings of Ram Dass, Be Here Now, and a relentless drive to rebuild, Kyle became a powerhouse for resilience of proof of work. Now a father, founder of Prep Lab, and even a star in the Bitcoiners movie, Kyle proves that hidden rock bottom isn't the end, it's the launch pad for greatness. Kyle, you disappeared from Bitcoin for the last 2 years. Welcome back, mate.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Where did you go? What happened? What's been happening over the last 2 years for you to sort of step away from Bitcoin and the interwebs?
Yeah, I took a major step back from the kind of overwhelming workload, and I just focused on family. I kind of stepped down and stepped out right before my first child was born. And I've spent the last 20 months just kind of really being focused on being a dad.
What a blessing, and well done on bringing another Bitcoiner into the world. I think he's very much in good hands with that. What's that journey of fatherhood been like? Like you've been very blessed. You've basically spent every day with your son as he's grown up. But what's that experience been like for yourself?
It's been totally wild, surreal. It's always something I knew I wanted. I was never really sure it would happen. And when it did, it was kind of like a complete blessing. But it's been a total whirlwind as well. I mean, it's definitely all of the things that you hear about fatherhood that you like kind of think you understand, but you don't until you're really thrown in it. It's for sure it has been one of the most difficult jobs. The lack of sleep, the craziness with the schedule, it's been right up there with some of my sleep schedules in the military, and I'm not 20 years old anymore, so it takes a totally different toll on the body and the brain.
Yeah, well, again, congratulations on going through that. You know, it's not something that I've experienced, and you know, I pay my respects for everyone that are bringing children into the world. With like when you've been down the rabbit hole with Bitcoin, Kyle, and we can see that the financial system is absolutely broken, the fiat financial system. We do have this parallel economy that's growing more and more. The conversation around Bitcoin, strategic reserve asset, nation states, central banks, companies accumulate insurance, agencies, et cetera, people just adding it onto their balance sheet or saving in it personally. But like, what are your thoughts about your son growing up into the world? Is he going to grow up into a world where it's total destruction and chaos and these evil central banking elite type nefarious people are controlling the world and it's still dystopian and we got CBDCs? Or by the time your son's, say, the age of 18, 20, where we're in that beautiful parallel economy that is Bitcoin, or is it a bit of both?
Yeah, man, I wish I had the crystal ball that gave me that answer. I would say in the early years, I think children are inherently a kind of biologically blessed with the idea, for the most part, of kind of being resilient to most of what's going on in the outside world. And I think it's also to some degree largely the parents' responsibility to kind of provide the space for them to kind of continue to see and experience the world that way. So I would say for at least many, many more years, he has that kind of youthful innocence that I hope remains. And what's going on with the evils of the world is kind of completely irrelevant to him. But I'm also a huge believer in the world is what we make it. You touched on the idea that like Ram Dass and many of like the kind of Buddhist teachings have inspired a lot of my own worldview. And I do believe that things are playing out at a very like physical level that are kind of trending in negative directions with the financial system, government, let's just say institutions. Like,
yep.
I believe that every institution, especially the very large institutions, have been built on a corrupted foundation. If your value system is the foundation, then every institution that gets built on top of that broken foundation being fiat. I mean, if the foundation of value itself can be corrupted, then government, healthcare, the family unit, childcare, education, like everything built on top of that is inherently shaky. So I think that's going to continue to get worse. But I also think that that's what's beautiful about Bitcoin. And many people have touched on this analogy that Bitcoin is a new foundation. It's a new non-corruptible value system that humanity can build things on top of. So I mean, a lot of it just depends on how fast and how many people kind of tap into and decide to get involved in kind of building out that better foundation. And even within where you kind of can't escape the old systems that be, it really still just does come down to like how you choose to let that affect you. Like there's space between what happens and how you react, and that space is what matters.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that. And I love the analogy of a foundation or even Bitcoin as like a framework for life. And I'd like to hear your thoughts. The way that I see Bitcoin is just truth. It's mathematics. It can't lie. It's set rules. There's no rulers. Like Bitcoin is what it is. It's not lying. You either have a UTXO or you don't have a UTXO. You can either control it or you can't control it. And like that's it. You can't game the system in any way. And I think when we've got something that's just so rock solid and doesn't really change or can't be changed in a very easy way, it just allows like every other decision or every brick that we build on top of that to be aligned with truth. Because like what you were saying, that's what that foundation is. Do you see it like that or sort of you frame it differently mentally?
No, I mean, I think maybe I would phrase it a little bit differently, but it's very similar. When I talk to people who, like, I currently pedicab in the city of Austin, and I get a lot of people who are not Bitcoiners, don't understand Bitcoin, just regular everyday people, in the conversation about like, oh, I wish I understood Bitcoin. I don't really understand it.
Really quickly, ladies and gentlemen, I've teamed up with the Bitcoin Way. This is the professional Bitcoin IT team. They can help you master your Bitcoin self-custody. Safety Namus, the author of the Bitcoin Standard, also recommends this professional Bitcoin IT cybersecurity team. Their guys are absolutely amazing. They can help you set up a node, protect your stack, get your Bitcoin off the exchange. Make sure that you are following best practices. Number one, that it's air-gapped. If you don't know what that means, I've put their details below for you. If you're worried about SIM swaps, reach out to the Bitcoin Way. Maybe you just want to know that you are doing the best thing. You're doing all the little tricks within your device to be able to make sure nobody can ever get into your Bitcoin, have any access. If you've got any queries about connecting to public USB and charging points, connecting to rogue Wi-Fi access points or malware-infected USB cables and flash drives, reach out to the Bitcoin cybersecurity team, the Bitcoin Way. Free 30-minute call. They are at the top of the description.
My kind of very quick elevator pitch, if you will, is that like it's not really that complicated. It's based on a couple of easy principles that I think everyone can kind of ideally understand. There's a guaranteed and verifiable total supply cap. because we're all kind of like logical human beings, we know that the number one equals the number one and always will, likely. I mean, who knows, but seems pretty likely that one will always equal one. And so now if we're looking at money as a tool that represents the capture of our time, energy, resource, so that I can transfer that tool for someone else's time, energy, resource at a later date. Guaranteed supply cap, 1 equals 1. If I have one or one piece of the guaranteed and verifiable whole, I can now begin using that understanding of the tool to collectively, with someone else who understands that value of the tool, we can begin to collectively determine the value of our time, energy, and resource. And that's not really super complicated. Like, money is a tool that represents the capture of time, energy, resource, verifiable supply, 1 equals 1. Any other questions? And like, normally by the end of like a 6 or 7 minute pedicab ride, people get off and they're like, wow, I've never had anybody explain it to me like that. And where can I get started?
Yeah, mate, it's sort of like my journey as well. Once I got into Bitcoin, started understanding, I'm still understanding and learning about Bitcoin every single day, but you just want to share it with so many people. And I'd like to hear how it's changed your life. But I think before we get into that, if you're willing, Kyle, I'd like to look like you're a combat medic serving in Afghanistan, which seems intense. I've never been to war or a war environment. I've heard quite a lot of your podcasts and you talking about it, and it just sounds like is hell on earth. And you said this saying that post-Afghanistan, in your words, I was broken as fuck. What was that like? Because you went there like to Afghanistan at a really young age. I guess, like, what was the experience while you're living through it, and then like the aftermath of that, spiritually, physically, psychologically?
Sure. I mean, that's a lot to unpack, but let's, I guess, just start with maybe kind of there, and then we can kind of go to after if you have more specific questions after. But yeah, I was 18 years old. I came from a broken family. I had a kind of like a long history as a teen of getting in a lot of trouble. I had built up a little bit of a criminal record, and I just kind of was on the path of like not really going anywhere productive with my life as a teen in Western Pennsylvania. If I kind of stayed on that path, my guess is I would have ended up in one of two places, like jail or kind of dead. A lot of the people I went to school with like have passed from heroin addiction and like a lot of other wild things. So I joined the military. My mom was actually in the military. She kind of pushed it as like an option to kind of find a different path forward. And I found my way into the Army. I decided to be a healthcare specialist is kind of what the identifier for the job was. I ended up at basic training, and they were kind of going around the room asking people what they were going to do. And I told them I'm a 68 whiskey, and that's the kind of military like identifier for the job you're going to do. And my drill sergeant goes, "Oh, you're a combat medic." And I was like, "No, I'm a healthcare specialist." And he goes, yeah, they just call it that so that women can be a healthcare specialist. But women at the time couldn't serve in combat roles, so they called it a healthcare specialist to not have it identified as a combat role. But typically men kind of find themselves in a combat role, and women kind of find themselves in the clinical role. And so I found out I was going to be a combat medic. Flash forward just a few months, I'm at my duty station, Fort Campbell, Kentucky, the 101st Airborne, one of the two most deployed military units in the US. And basically what I learned upon arrival was that every single year, your unit just kind of goes for deployment. Then you'll deploy for a year, come back, spend 1 year, deploy for a year. So they had just gotten back. I knew I had roughly 1 year before I was going to deploy. I thought when I first arrived that like basic training was over, my job training was over. Now I finally kind of got to be an adult and be in the real army, where I was going to have some kind of relaxation and downtime and less people like on my back all the time. Not really how that worked out, especially being at like one of the most deployed units. And it turns out the medics are kind of the most intense group of people. You basically have to do everything that like the infantry and some of the most intense portions of a unit are going to do, but you're going to do it with 45 pounds more gear because you're carrying a bag full of medical equipment. And so it kind of got very intense very quickly. I will never forget the first day I walked into the aid station. I get kind of like walked into the office where the leadership is. They go, "Private Murphy, what's the 9-line medevac?" Literally not hello, welcome in, just here's a question for you. And I responded with, "Sergeant, I don't know. I was told that we wouldn't need to know that." And they then handed me like a 20-pound rock with the 9-line medevac taped to it. And they were like, "This is your new buddy, wall squats until you have it memorized." And I literally just went into a wall squat with this 20-pound rock in front of me. And that's kind of the first 10 minutes of my life as a combat medic. And it only got more intense from there. I mean, much, much more intense. The same NCO who asked me that question once stated to us that his goal was to stress us out so much that by the time we got to Afghanistan and like bullets are pinging off trucks and bombs are going off, that stress will just be muscle memory and you'll go into like flow state and just react and do what you need to do. And I mean, to some degree, it really did work. I went to Afghanistan, things got pretty crazy over there, but when shit really did hit the fan, muscle memory really it's a pretty powerful tool. That being said, before we left for Afghanistan, I had a buddy, his name was Wayne. He told me this training that we're going to do right before we go will be the worst thing that you've ever gone through. Everything about this shithole in Louisiana is the worst place you've ever been. He said, the only thing that will be worse overseas is that nothing in training can prepare you for the death of a friend. And that also turned out to be kind of wildly accurate. We left for Afghanistan, and the way that the kind of travel goes is typically you're going to go to a location that's already got bases built out. It already has a military presence there. And so our unit sent what's called like a forward unit, just like a handful of kind of like high level leadership and some of their kind of right hand people to go link up with the outgoing unit to get information, learn the lay of the land, all of that. They'd been there for maybe 2 weeks. We ended up coming right behind them. And at our very first stop on our way to Afghanistan, we got put on what's called a blackout. The military does not like for families to kind of learn about the deaths of loved ones from like Timmy posting about it on Facebook. They really want to go through the approved kind of communication structure. And so a blackout means no phones, no computers, like no access to communications whatsoever. And we got put on our first blackout basically on day one on our way to Afghanistan, because some of the senior leadership that had gone ahead of us had actually died in an RPG attack. And so that was kind of when shit got really real, really fast. It's like we haven't even made it there yet, and people are already dead. Yeah, and I mean, again, I will probably say this a few times, but it only kind of kept getting crazier from there. I don't know if you've seen this film, but there was a documentary that came out. It came out actually while I was in Afghanistan. It was called Restrepo. It was a film about this unit that had lost one of their guys, Private Restrepo. And it was kind of the emotional toll that took on their unit and life in general while they were deployed. And I'll never forget this either. There was one point where at this point, we had lost, I think it was already like 8 people. We had lost 7 or 8 people at this point. We were maybe 3 or 4 months into our 1-year deployment. And our first sergeant literally called us to formation, had all of us outside, and quoted something about Private Restrepo, and basically told us that that documentary was about a bunch of little bitches and that people die, we're at war, it was time to just suck it up and keep going. And that's kind of where I found myself, I would say, by the end of a year in Afghanistan. When it first started happening, that first death was like, holy shit, it was terrifying. I cried. I was not prepared to go. There's nothing I could do about it. By the 2nd, 3rd, 7th death, it was like, okay, this really sucks. I don't really want to keep doing this. By the time we lost our 11th, which was our last casualty, at least while we were deployed, I just remember being angry. It was no longer even just like sad or depressed. It was just like, I do not want to have to go to another funeral. Like, just leave me the fuck alone. Like, it kind of just became the mentality he described of like, yeah, I get it. Like, people die. Why the fuck do I need to go to this funeral? Like, just leave me alone. Like, this is my time. I want to watch a movie, go to the gym. Just completely negative, angry emotions towards the idea of death. And it was wild because that also changes your perspective, I guess, if you will, for the other side. You get trained a lot about the bad guy before you go. And that's not really understood until someone dies. But then when someone does die, very quickly, you kind of reach this conclusion that it's like, oh shit, like everybody that's not wearing what I'm wearing on like this side of the line is an enemy. Like women, children, babies, like they're all terrorists. Just like, what level of training are they at? And so you kind of like take all of that and you compress it into a single human being. And it's a lot emotionally, especially when you leave that environment and kind of plug back into what is supposed to be like the real world, the regular environment. Like, oh, hey, you're out now. Like, welcome home. Like, I hope things go well with you at your job at Starbucks or whatever it is that you find yourself doing. And there's not really enough help. I mean, there's plenty of available resources, but the largest problem is that you get so trained to understand, like physically, mentally, spiritually, that like it doesn't matter how fucked up it gets. There's nothing wrong with you. That you kind of really internalize that. You believe it. It becomes who you are. And so even if resources are there, you don't seek them out.
Just an insane thing. Like I can't really imagine people like going and killing other people. When you're saying like they're the bad guys, or you're trained to think they're the bad guys, like looking back, do you still see them as the bad guys? Like everyone as the bad guys, or was like the narrative of why you're there different to like what you believe now?
Yeah, very, very different. I mean, it took a long time and it took a lot of healing and different things to kind of find like a new path forward, not just for myself physically in the world, but just mentally and spiritually. And at this point, I mean, I kind of look at it as like, I'll ask people who, I mean, just for the sake of this conversation, it's like, what would you do, right? If in Australia next week, all of a sudden there were like a bunch of guys who spoke a language you didn't understand, driving down the street in like 18-ton armored vehicles, and they killed your uncle or your brother or your dad or your mom. Like, what would that do to you? And that's kind of the conclusion I reached, is like, we're the outsiders. We're the ones who are there in a military uniform carrying guns. Like, it's a much, much, much more nuanced conversation than just like good guy, bad guy, one side versus the other side. And a lot of the kind of conclusions I reached for myself were that there weren't really any good reasons I could see why we should have been there in the first place. And the reasons that I could come up with why we might have been there were pretty gross, pretty nefarious. And that's kind of when I just reached a personal conclusion that it was like something needs to change, like drastically, not something small, but like revolutionary. Like we just need different systems in place so that these kind of atrocities don't continue. And even before I understood what that meant or what I thought I could do to help or really any of it, there was just this subconscious feeling of like, this is broken. The world is broken. Getting out and being back in the real world didn't feel right. Nothing felt right. And I just started telling my family and friends, like, guys, you need to prepare. Like, a revolution is imminent. And over the few years after that, I kind of found my way into yoga. Yoga was the place where I kind of started to find answers for myself. It was kind of I would say the very beginning of my own kind of spiritual journey. And from there, it kind of led me into a path of like traveling the world. I needed to get outside of America and see more of the world, see different cultures and different people and different ways of living. And so eventually I took an opportunity in California that seemed like it would present me an opportunity to get out and do that. And after 18 months, I had saved enough money. I bought a one-way ticket to Cape Town, South Africa, and was a 1 year journey around Africa, Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, really just kind of trying to get out there and meet people and learn about myself. And it was in that journey that I started to, I was actually introduced to yoga and was then introduced to Bitcoin through another guy, a young kid who was going through yoga teacher training with me. But his introduction was, there's this magic internet money that's being used on the dark web. You can buy like weed and LSD and shit. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Interesting. And just over the next few years after that, everywhere I went, somehow it just kept coming back up. I would have conversations with it about it with professors at the university in San Francisco, or business majors on the front steps of a hostel in Romania. Just everywhere I went, I kept having these huge philosophical level, like hours long conversations about this interesting asset and network called Bitcoin. And more and more I learned, the more I started to kind of piece together that it seemed like a tool that represented solutions to many of the problems I had also seen, not just from my time in the military, but simultaneously while I was learning about Bitcoin and traveling around the world. I had started to believe that revolution I didn't really understand was not just a US-based thing, but it was a global thing. And that the revolution was really bigger than just the military. It was that our entire value system is broken. And globally, a human level value system being corrupted is a huge problem for understanding the value of human life. And that's why I once I kind of reached that conclusion, it was like, I have to basically be all in on this thing, because it just feels like I was kind of destined to be here and to kind of help. It was like a calling. By the time I started the Austin Bitcoin Club and found my way to Austin, it was literally like God had called me to do what I needed to do to kind of push this thing forward.
Amen to that, brother. That's absolutely amazing. And when you were talking about it, then you didn't really mention Bitcoin as money, but the way that you described Bitcoin was almost like a spiritual calling, or like it become to God type of moment. Beside Bitcoin, like being number go up, because that's sort of what draws the majority of people in. I found for myself through studying it, it's, for me at least, it's incredibly spiritual, and it's changed every aspect of my reality. Like, what's your experience been, and like, how do you see Bitcoin, or what is Bitcoin to you? Is it just money, or is it something bigger than that?
It's interesting because I reached the conclusions while I was learning about Bitcoin, but I don't really think that Bitcoin for me was the reason I like found myself like going down a spiritual path. I don't think Bitcoin is the reason that I went all in. I don't think Bitcoin created a sense of purpose. And I mean, I'm not saying that it hasn't for some people, and I think that's a brilliant and beautiful thing if it has. But I think I reached a lot of the conclusions that I had spiritually before Bitcoin, or while I was coming to an understanding of Bitcoin. I genuinely believe, I think I said this in the end of the documentary that you mentioned, and it is that ultimately I'm bullish on humanity, and I believe we would get where we're going with Bitcoin without Bitcoin, because that path is a spiritual path. I do believe that Bitcoin is a tool that represents an easier path, if you will, just in the sense that I believe it is a less violent path forward. It's not a completely violence-free path forward. I think the great transfer of power, if you will, is going to come through difficult times ahead. But I do believe that Bitcoin is a tool that represents the most peaceful possible transition of power. And that's kind of the way I feel about it spiritually and kind of money-wise. I mean, it is just a representation of value. And at the end of the day, the human representation of value would mean very little if we didn't have the humans to represent that value. So I'm more bullish on people and humanity and community than I am per se of Bitcoin. But I do believe that Bitcoin plays a pivotal role in helping us to that new understanding and new flourishing.
No, I like that. If I was to phrase it, or just to make sure that I'm sort of hearing it correctly, you're sort of like on a spiritual path already, or a path to seek truth and to go through and look at the dark side and stuff, and then through just seeking truth, trying to be the best person, it sort of brought Bitcoin in, and those merged together. Similar to that, or?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty easy way to sum it up.
Yeah. And one other thing that you said is, Ram Dass, be here now. I haven't read that book for a very long time, but also went down there. How do you think about, like you said, human nature is going to continue to get better whether there's Bitcoin or not? And I agree. I believe that the truth will always win. It's so absurd that we're spinning, like we're on a rock spinning through time and space, going from wherever to wherever, but we're just here. Now, is this going to be a quick transition, or is it just, well, does it even matter if it happens like for the whole globe, that there's this just big awakening, or it's just like as more and more people awake, and like take the Bitcoin community, there's a lot of people that are awake, they're just going to come together and then sort of create their own little bubble, and there'll be different things going on the planet at different times? Or do you reckon we get to a point where we have a collective shift and everyone wakes up after like a period of transition?
Great question. I think if you asked 10 different Bitcoiners, you might get 10 different answers. I really hope, and I've called people out on this in my past in Bitcoin. I've communicated my beliefs on this in the past. I really hope it's not just well, I understood it faster than you, and like I got a bunch of friends who understood it faster than you, so we'll just build our own little thing over here, and like the rest of you be damned. That's not the kind of bullishness on humanity that I kind of hope we represent as a community. I think if you look at the the Matrix, or the even going further back, the allegory of the cave from Plato. I think the real challenge with waking up, if you will, is that the real work is going back in and trying not to fall back asleep while you help others also see the light. And that's the real challenge of what we have ahead of us, is that the system, the cave, it's designed to put you to sleep. It's designed to make things seem easy and wonderful and keep you complacent. And it's not always easy, especially if you have to spend a lot of time in there, if you will, to like constantly be able to remember that you've seen the sun, you've seen the outside. If you've seen the outside for a glimpse and then spend the next year, 2 years, 3 years inside the system trying to like work others out, it's easy to get launched back into the system yourself. And I think, as easy as it is to do, it's hard to not. I think the hard work is worth it, because I think that's what we need to do as a people to like stand our best chance of success. I do believe for the most part that our strength lies in our numbers, and the more people that we can have on our side who understand what's happening, who understand the shifts that are coming, the more likely we are to succeed.
That's interesting. Like the hard work is worth it. Something that may benefit, even if it just benefits one soul, if you're willing to go into it. I've got like a history of addiction, very, very amazing times with the police as a kid. They knew me on a first name basis, unfortunately. It sort of sounds like same stuff. I had a lot of trauma from my youth that I drowned out with addiction. I just wanted to blank out basically my existence, and couldn't really deal with the real world as such. I couldn't face it sober. Eventually I got to a place where like I just had to look at the dark side of my soul and go through it. And that was like the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But then to come out on the other side, like it was 100% worth it. I know you've gone down and you've faced some things that are like really fucked up, man. Being in a war zone and, losing friends and stuff, that's, I can't imagine the turmoil and the tear and the soul. You mentioned yoga. Are there some other things that you're doing, or when you started to do the hard work, that you'd like to share with people that were potentially helpful for yourself? They may or may not be helpful for other people, but like diet, practices, meditation, yoga.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those really challenging things, right? Because I've been asked a lot about this idea of like helping others. Like, what about helping the veteran community? Like, I really do believe that everyone, this is, I mean, maybe also very Buddhist, right? But there's this idea that I may be able to show you kind of like snap photographs from like my own journey. I can like kind of show you a picture book, if you will, of like my own journey. But even though I can show you that, it doesn't necessarily reflect that will be the same journey that you go on. Just because it worked for me doesn't mean it will work for you. I think the hardest part is just acknowledging that maybe there's something wrong. And I don't know, I mean, how did you kind of reach your moment where you had that conversation with yourself, where you said, like, you know what, you talked about going through the darkness to get to the other side. Like, you didn't just like fall into the darkness and then say, oh, I guess I just have to work through it. You worked your way into the darkness and then had to work your way back out. So like, what was that moment for you? I know for me, it was in a yoga studio, and it was when we had a night where we basically did like this sharing circle. and everybody that was participating was like free to kind of say something that had been like a trauma in their past and try to like work through it. And this one girl shared something that to me just seemed really profound, considering she was sitting in a room full of essential strangers. And I didn't really have the courage that session to like open up and like say anything. But at the end of the night, everybody left and it was just me and one of the teachers from the studio. And I just broke down. I broke down into tears. I was a total mess. And she asked me what was wrong. And I said, I just don't understand how I'm supposed to forgive a group of people who murdered my friends, my family, and like not dishonor the memory of those people. And my real work began with the question she asked me right after that. She said, would the people that you're talking about, would those people want this for you? You're talking about people who you don't want to dishonor their memory, your friends, your family. Would they want you to carry all of this grief, all of this hatred, all of this burden for them? And then she really just stood there and gave me the space to be myself. She basically said, like, look, regardless of your answer, I mean, she said nothing. She just stood there quietly and like allowed me to like look into her eyes and see that she genuinely meant, like, whatever happens, I'm here for you and I love you. And that one single person who said, I love you no matter what, began the work.
Well, and obviously it didn't happen overnight, but I think that's pretty powerful. Kyle, thanks so much for sharing that. That's incredible. And I also agree, like, one of the other things that you're saying is somebody else's journey is not going to be our own journey. But if we see someone potentially like in a similar situation that's maybe got a similar lived experience and they've worked through it and gained lived expertise, we're not necessarily going to go on the same journey as them, but if someone else can do it, at least for myself, like, I believe if somebody else can do it, at least it's possible. So maybe it ignites a little bit of hope, but that doesn't take away from actually having to go through and do the work. But it's nice when people are willing to hold that space. So originally, just like flipping gears, because mate, you've done some really interesting things. You founded Pleb Lab in Austin Bitcoin Club. Like, first off, what was Pleb Lab? And then I reckon we dive into the Bitcoin meetup, the Austin Bitcoin Club.
Sure. I mean, Pleb Lab was our aim to create a collaborative workspace. It was focused on the idea of community. And the idea was to get as many intelligent Bitcoin builders together as we possibly could, and to put the signal out there that we were a space where Bitcoiners were welcome and that where Bitcoiners were working together. It was this idea of, like, if you are trying to make something happen in Bitcoin for yourself, for a company, it doesn't really matter what. But it was this idea that if you were working on something in Bitcoin, you would bring value to other people working on something in Bitcoin. And the idea was, if we could put as many of those smart people together in a room, we could build something of real value inside. And our focus would then be to try and find value outside that believed in the value inside, and to try and funnel some of that value into the people and the companies that were being built inside. So, I mean, long story short, the generalized idea became the first Bitcoin kind of accelerator program.
Yeah. Do you reckon, like, when you did it, the time was right? Or, like, we still need to go through like one or two cycles for an idea like that really to take place? And I guess what I'm referring to is, I live in this tiny little town. There's really, maybe there's some unknown Bitcoin person, but there's a couple of people holding Bitcoins and people, I'd say more acquaintances that hold Bitcoin, but they're also shitcoiners. There's like nobody like pure Bitcoin only ethos, fix the money, fix the world, understand that everything else is garbage. So like, I feel like here we're so slow or a little bit backwards, but Australia is like that. Just in general, like it's nice, the reefs out there, the beaches, everyone's fucking easy going, la-di-da, and they don't realize that the financial world is totally collapsing around them. Inflation's going through the roof. It's going to continue to get bad. So something like that I don't think would work that well, especially where I live, but maybe not even in Australia. I just don't think there's enough numbers, but like, what was it like in Austin?
We were lucky that we were kind of pre-primed to be successful in Austin. I mean, I came down here because the Austin Bit Devs community had become kind of this beacon on the hill during the pandemic. It was like one of the earliest, actually it may have been the earliest Bitcoin meetup to start back up, bucking the trend of like, you're not allowed to be together in person.
Bitcoiners.
Yeah. And so when I came down here because of that shining light on the hill. And I realized like, wow, there's people flying in from around the country and around the world. Every month I went, there were people from like London and Australia and literally all around the world flying into this meetup to be around like-minded people and to work on building out the ecosystem. But it was super technical. There was nothing really like social. I mean, there was like a little bit of barbecue after, which was great. For me, that was like the best part because I'm not technical. I'm not a developer. I'm not a coder. I don't know any of that stuff. So it was just typically like 2 hours of getting over my head, followed by like half an hour of kind of maybe get to mingle with one or two people over some barbecue. And that was kind of the thought behind the Austin Bitcoin Club was like, why don't we just take that social part and just have a meetup that's just specifically for that instead of just the technical. I mean, I think it's great that we have the technical, but why don't we also have the social? And that was really the basis for not just the Austin Bitcoin Club, but for Pleb Lab as well. Pleb Lab was my best aim and our best aim at kind of trying to balance the equation of social, fun, and like serious work. Because what I saw when we got here was it seemed like everything was so like rigid and like, if you do this, you'll have a bad time. If you don't custody this way, you'll have a bad time. If you don't do this or do this, everything was like, meh. And it was, like, I get it. Like we have room for like security improvements. We have room for like privacy improvements, but it seemed to me that the best way to go about building all of that was to attract more builders to the space. And it didn't seem to me that the best way to attract people was to put forward all the time. And so ABC and Pleb Lab were both kind of a vision of a serious but also fun space that I thought was kind of lacking. But Austin wasn't lacking. So we were lucky because there were a lot of people that came for that Austin Bit Devs that stayed. And we kind of took that and ran with it. And I think over the 6 or 7 months of Austin Bitcoin Club, before we really kind of started Pleb Lab, we kept attracting more and more people to Austin who were curious about and interested in and working on Bitcoin, because we started putting out that signal that said, hey guys, not only are we building here, but we're having a good time here. Come and join us. And so it was like a once in a lifetime opportunity. Whether or not it was too early, the right time, I don't really know. But I think we inspired a lot of other people to try similar things. I mean, after Pleb Lab came the Bitcoin Commons at Unchained Capital. After Unchained launched the Bitcoin Commons, we literally got a high stakes, big funding accelerator called Wolf in New York City. I mean, whether or not we were directly responsible for that or not, I mean, I don't know. But I feel like we had the first concept, and it was the vision that we put out there that I believe helped to at least create some of the concept behind maybe the time is now. And maybe it wasn't. I don't know. I mean, it's still very, very, very early in Bitcoin. So
And I agree. It's very early in Bitcoin, and yeah, I think sort of going back and showing people that it's possible inspires people to be able to go out and take what works and then make it their own. One thing I'd like to do is a huge shout out to Cole, as someone that I follow over on X, a rancher. You've been buying beef, I believe, from Cole for the last 3 years. What's that like? And I guess, like, how's diet come into your life these days?
I mean, I think diet's really important, right? Like, your body is your temple. Cole's a great guy. I've known Cole, honestly, even before we started the Austin Bitcoin Club. I was maybe only living in Austin for 3 or 4 months before I was introduced to Cole and his company. I actually lived in my FedEx truck, and I needed to get some diesel maintenance work done on the truck. And I was at this diesel mechanic, and I was talking to the guy at the front desk, and I just happened to mention that I was looking for a rancher. And he was like, oh, I know 2 of them. He's like, I got a guy that sells Wagyu. He's like, and then I also know this guy, Michael, who works for a company it's not Wagyu. He's like, but if I'm being honest, it's the best beef I've ever eaten. He's like, I think it's even better than the Wagyu. And I was like, you have a card? And he did. And that was kind of the very beginning of that relationship. I just knew that I had moved to Texas. I wanted to eat better. I wanted to try and maybe look at doing something. I don't know if I was quite on carnivore back then, but I was definitely trying to switch more to like a keto, high fat, kind of like all natural diet. And from there, yeah, I mean, it just became a great relationship. He's a great rancher, great steward of the land. Just a general, like, great and kind, like, human being. I'll actually never forget, there was a time, it was right around this time last year, actually, and I had placed an order for beef, and there was some kind of issue with the processing that backed it up by like a day or 2. And he was like, I'm going to personally deliver this. He's like, is there somewhere we can meet? Like, how does this work? And I was like, yeah. I was like, I can meet you halfway. And he was literally like, he's like, I can bring it all the way to you if you need. He's like, I know you've got the newborn. He's like, things have got to be pretty stressful right now. And I was like, dude, I really do appreciate that, but I swear I can meet you halfway, and you don't have to drive all the way up here. But that's the kind of guy Cole is he's always thinking about more than just himself. So it's a great relationship to have. I wish I knew more hunting skills. I wish I had a farm to grow cattle of my own, but the third best thing you can do for your health in a line of like hunt, raise your own, the next best one is like know a quality rancher yourself, or a hunter, like know a hunter or a rancher. So either be one or know one. And for now, like knowing one, definitely it gets the job done. We get a lot of high quality food. I know what goes into my body, and I believe whatever diet you're on, whether you're carnivore, vegan, vegetarian, I really think in 2024, 2025, the most important thing you can do for your body is to just know what's going in it, and where it's come from. If you're vegan, like know where you're getting your crops, know where you're getting your plants, know where your food comes from. Because if you don't, I think regardless of what the food is, you're probably putting yourself at greater risk. So.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm mainly carnivore myself, and just to add on to this, I've gone through vegan, pescatarian, paleo, ketogenic, blah, blah, blah. And carnivore is what works best for me. But I've noticed, like, I was running a permaculture farm. I managed one with a whole lot of woofers and stuff for a number of years, and built it from the ground up. And we've grown like 150 varieties of fruit, vegetables, herbs, etc. And it's really like the chemicals that are going on, and whether they're monocropped or not. And, you know, while I eat mainly meat now and I knock salad on X and stuff, it's really just whatever food that's filled with sugar or preservatives or numbers or dyes or chemicals. I resonate with that. And I just want to shout out to two other ranchers. Texas Slim as well works with Cole, and then Jacob Wolke over here in Australia. But yeah, everyone get to know your rancher. Kyle Murphy, you said something at the end of the Bitcoiners documentary, and it was the way that you said it, and I could really feel it coming out behind you. But as stay humble and stack sats, what's that mean to you?
I think it's a life lesson to understand that wealth doesn't, I think we touched on this already, but wealth just doesn't, wealth in the sense of monetary wealth does not provide a happy life. I think it is a lot of the hard work we've touched on during this podcast that provides a happy life. It's mindset that provides a happy life. It's how you handle stressors that provides a happy life. And I think oftentimes it's easy to see that number go up that can be so beneficial for us as an early adopter, as a builder in the space, that can easily have us lose sight of the importance of our relationship with ourselves, the world around us, and others. And I think it's a powerful meme because, just like I said at the end of the film, if you don't do it yourself on a long enough timeline, the universe is just going to do it for you. You are going to be humbled regardless. So it's best to just put in the work now. And that's kind of what stack sats, stay humble means. I know we built a personal brand, and for so long, much of the early days of ABC and Pleb Lab were focused on Kyle Murphy as a brand. And we knew, even my co-founder Carr used to say, he's like, I'm going to blow your head up, but also make sure that it doesn't get too big. And I really did. I thought I was being humble. I thought I was doing what I needed to do. And I think that's really maybe the hardest part, is just that real time spent sitting down and kind of doing self-reflection. And I think that's where I lost my way, was that I stopped spending enough time self-reflecting. Meditation played a big role in kind of helping my life move forward, and I had kind of gotten away from that. And I do believe that kind of staying in touch with that side of you, with that space, it's incredibly important, because the ego it's a pretty crazy thing, and it can really mess things up pretty good.
I think that's a powerful line to leave it. Actually, one thing I think that's very important for anyone watching, I can see that you're seeking or you're looking for work in the Bitcoin space. I'll link your X and stuff below, but if anyone's got anything that Kyle may be interested in, definitely reach out. And it sounds like you're ready to come back in. Your son's a little bit older. You've got time, capacity. What is it about sort of working in Bitcoin specifically that you're looking for or seeking?
I think it's kind of just the perfect time. I've realized that as much as I did need to step away to focus on my family in the 2 years since then, I've also kind of realized that work outside of Bitcoin just doesn't have the same kind of purpose impact in my life. No matter what I've done outside of the Bitcoin space, I just constantly kind of find myself talking about intertwining it. Even when I was selling insurance at one of the largest insurance funds, I was inside there, having questions about what are you watching in the stock market? And I'm I'm watching Bitcoin, and I would get laughed at. I would get people, the senior leadership, laughing me out of the room. And I'm hey, whatever works for you, man. But nothing, it really does feel once again, it's just kind of God has told me that Bitcoin is where I'm supposed to be. And no matter what I've done when I don't face that reality, things aren't quite where I know they could be and should be. And at this point, it just feels like it's time to get involved again. I know that I bring value to someone who's looking for that value. And honestly, I would say based on the skill sets that I know I have and the talents that I bring, I would say that probably my best bet is going to be in something event and community oriented and or on the sales side of things. So if you're out there, if you're hiring, come find me.
Definitely reach out. An incredible asset to your team. Kyle, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'll put all your links below, and everyone get in contact and check out the Bitcoiners movie. It's the best documentary I've seen. It was really good. It's just very real, and it's really summed up, I reckon, what Bitcoin is meant to be and the journey of everyone.
It was a great film. It was a great time to film and produce. Rob, the guy who shot the film, is a wonderful human being as well. We got to be really good friends. I mean, we filmed that for over 2 years together, which is crazy how time flies. But you could tell he really put in a lot of that proof of work as well. And I think the film came out great. Yeah.
It definitely did. I'll link that in the description as well, the YouTube video for it. Everyone, do something nice for yourself, for somebody else. Be blessed. Peace.